So has the time come to dump the EU and start looking at Mercosur for future? I'm going to discuss this topic in a lot of detail. I'm going to discuss three very important things. One is the regulations or the rules that EU plans to implement and how this affects all the CBI and residency by investment programs. Second, we're going to take a brief look at some of the issues that have cropped up with certain programs. Over 200 passports from an EU country terminated, right? There must have been some due diligence, but still these passports got terminated. Portugal recently abruptly just cancelled the golden visa, some ramifications from that. And then finally, we're going to take a look at the direction in which this is headed. And should you consider or seriously consider Mercosur for future, given that what's happening with some of these moving pieces, right? Before we get started with this all exciting topic, if you're new to my channel, my name is Jay, and here we discuss investments that lead to residencies, citizenships, analysis, news articles, breaking, and a whole lot more. So make sure you go ahead and subscribe like right now. Turn on the bell notification as well, so you are immediately notified regarding any new breakthrough in the CBI or RBI domain. Now let's start with the first part, which is some of the issues or some of the recommendations that we are seeing. So EU is it's really looking to close or put pressure on the CBI countries or RBI countries. And then the vehicle or the mode is like the Schengen access. So that is something that's used as a pressure point, right? So if you want to keep the Schengen access, then you better listen to us. You better close these programs or make drastic changes. So obviously the countries value the Schengen access, and that is really the effective tool that is at stake here. So a lot of programs are closing. Portugal just announced program closure. Now, if you haven't checked out my video regarding what happens to the current investors, I would highly recommend you go ahead and take a look at this link. This is about are investors screwed because of the changes in the Portugal golden visa. So that's the first one. And then you had passport terminations in Cyprus. So typically when you do CBI program, right? When you allocate some funds, it's a huge amount of money that we're talking about. In case of Cyprus, the figure runs upwards of $750K to $1 million or even more. So there's a lot of time commitment, capital commitment, etc. There's a very stringent due diligence process that's run, even with the St. Kitts and Nevis. There's that due diligence. Same way, each country has their very strict due diligence process. Once that entire vetting process is complete, then they hand you the benefit, which is a residency or a passport. Now with Cyprus, over 200 passports were terminated. They were canceled. So what happened really, right? So one or two cases is understandable. There could be a slip through. Someone may have lied. There could be a situation with fraud, etc. But when you talk about a large number, like 200 applications and 200 passports being canceled, that is something very startling. Now, if you have missed that video regarding the passport cancellations and how countries are canceling passports and what's up on the horizon on that front, make sure to return and check this link out. This talks about this topic in a lot more detail. Now, some of the pressure points that EU is proposing, let's say the best case scenario is that these programs are terminated. So there is no tax issues. People won't leave. People will stick to their countries. And everyone is, the EU is very happy in that instance. But if, let's say, there's a phase out period or certain countries don't agree, then there are some points which are strictly pushed for, right? So it's really you lose the access or you follow this. So there's a good chance that the countries are being pressurized with certain points. And some of the things that they're looking at is trying to make this process burdensome and cumbersome and less appealing and attractive to investors. So putting a lot of burden, monitoring of actual place of residence. That's one of the big points that they're proposing. Now, place of residence in the historic or traditional terms is where you reside, right? You physically live in that country, you don't go anywhere, you're from that country, you live there. With the very complex changing environment, a lot of people are these days establishing residencies. They don't live in one location, right? And it's up to them, right? Rich individuals, rich businessmen, or young entrepreneurs, or even the people in the service industry, right? They're digital nomads these days, so they don't like living in one country. They don't just, maybe they just don't enjoy, the restrictions that a particular country has to offer. So they're spending some time in country A, country B, country C, and that is a life that they have chosen. It's not an easy life, right? You have to put in a lot of sacrifices to switch and change like that. You have multiple residencies and you're moving around. So it's entirely possible that someone is not residing in a particular location for 6 months at stretch. Maybe they're splitting, a few months here, a few months there, and that's how they're looking at the year. Maybe in the winters you go somewhere, maybe in summers you're somewhere else. Maybe, you're splitting your time, 40, 40, 20, that could be the split. So you need not necessarily be residing in one particular location. But here the push seems to be monitor the actual place of residence. That's one of the recommendations. The second one is the AML. Now, AML is good, right? You don't want any bad practices and no one should be indulging in that. But sometimes, depending upon where you're coming from, let's say it's a Western country, the source of funds is always the bank, right? So it's always one location or a property or whatever it is. Some countries don't function like that. There could be ancestral wealth, and that also can be proved. But it's just a cumbersome process to go through all the steps as if you're being investigated. Then when you're committing so much capital, you want the benefit quickly. What if a big investigation starts and then you're just sitting and proving and something is not satisfactory, and then your eventual benefit aside, you're just spending all your time and energy and you're mentally drained just going through this entire surveillance process. So is it worth it at the end of the day? So these are some of the very hard pushes that are happening. So the chances are that countries are the EU would obviously pressurize these CBI countries. The chances are that countries might capitulate and give in, and just to save that Schengen access, they might say, yep, we're canceling the program, just like the Portugal golden visa. Now, again, with the termination of that program with no notice, again, more details have to come out. There might be some resolutions or some respite that they might provide, but as of now, looks like the people who have invested and who have not filed, they are in a big limbo until there's more clarification, right? So you have those uncertainties and risks associated when you're dealing with that geographical location. And let's say you go through this whole process, right? You do the whole due diligence. At the end of the day, your passport should not be terminated, right? You expect that once you go through this process, you're getting the benefit, they must have checked it. So that's one area of consideration that you have to keep into mind. Now, with all these problems, right, one of the big changes that had happened was UK stepped away from the EU, and everyone felt that that's just the start. There would be other countries that may follow the lead. So that was a big change, right? So if countries start following that example, if they start leaving the European Union, then it's a different story. Then the strength is, kind of going to shift. But for now, smaller countries within that region are desperate. It's a dream for them to join the EU. A lot of people these days are actually running away from the EU because they're just tired of living in this surveillance and monitoring and all of this type of lifestyle. Now, this is good for some people. They might like it. It keeps the environment clean. But for some other type of people, they don't want all of this kind of stuff, right? They want to be left alone. They want to be kept alone. They're traveling. They don't have the time for all of this. So is it time now really to shift focus from this old school or this, this whole framework and start looking at the more flexible, the more interesting area, which is the Mercosur, right? So Mercosur is a consortium, right? It's just like the EU. It's a group of countries. It's Latin and South American countries. Some of the notable example or the full members of the Mercosur are Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay. Venezuela has been suspended, but those are notable big countries. And then they also have associate countries, which are Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Peru, and Suriname. So these are the Mercosur countries. Now, typically, historically, EU had a lot of value right? Because everyone wanted to run to the EU. But with exceedingly this entire complex, ever-changing world that we're living in, a lot of people are sick and tired of just keeping up with all these changes. Again, I'm not saying or suggesting that the changes are bad, the changes are good, but for a certain set of people, they would really not agree with all of this, what is happening. So in that sense, I personally feel, this is a personal opinion, this is not immigration, legal, or tax advice, but I personally feel that the EU, that location is good for certain type of people, but for other people who don't want to go through this whole entire hassle, Mercosur makes for a very interesting option. These countries are not only flexible, they're very fast for citizenship, they're very fast for residency, less, comparatively, I would say less stringent in the way they look at things, right? So it gives you more of a flexible or the easy environment to survive and to live in. So for future, right, the future of residencies and citizenships, again, I firmly believe that, outright paying for something is always, it comes with its own set of disadvantages. But if you're looking for true connection, flexible connection, which leads to something genuine, long-term, sustainable, and advantageous, then I personally feel that the Mercosur is definitely worth taking a look at when you're talking about the future. All right, if you are interested, right, if you're interested in any of the residencies or want to see which residency best fits in your circumstances, can get you the maximum benefit for whatever you're trying to do in life, you can always click the link in the description, book a call with us. We can discuss what you're up to, what you're looking for, and then we can jointly come up with the best residency that can fit your needs. And if you liked this video, make sure to give me a thumbs up and catch you in the next one.